Okay, so in this example, I'm going to go over named parameters. So this is kind of just a simple like tweak on the last one, just to show you how it works. So I'm going to go ahead and show it first. Actually, I'm not going to go show you the code first. So here's the changes I made. Let me collapse some things. It's always on this file. I want it to be on this one. So most of it happens in here and with the play craps. So you notice I've added a parameter before the optional called sides. So what this is going to allow is to play craps with different sides of dice. I don't think the rules for craps will be legitimate after this because the statistics will be off, of course, but it was just meant to serve as an example. So this is for D6, D10, D12, right? Hexahedron. I don't know what the name for the 10-sided because it's not platonic, but dodecahedron, right? Anyway, so when the program starts, one of these will be checked. 6 is always checked to begin with because I put that in the form load event. That's the RDO6.checked is equal to true, so it will always be checked. So one of these will always be checked. That radio buttons kind of reduce your need for error checking because there's a limited amount of things they can be. Only one of them can be checked. And if you ensure that, one or none technically, but if any are checked, it'll only be one. And I make it to where the 6 is checked in the beginning when I roll this. So talking about the named parameters, the way you use them is you can always just put the name colon before the argument you're sending. And here's what I did. This is not a good name. You should probably use the word sides, even if you use it in other methods. But I call it S to represent sides. So I have a method called getSides that will return the number of sides on the die. This number is determined by the radio button. So let me show you how that works real quick. Here it is. I've got a breakpoint in here too. So getSides, I don't have to pass anything to it because all the information comes from the form in the form of radio buttons. So I don't need any arguments, no parameters. It will return an integer, that integer being the number of sides that's selected. So what I do is I iterate over all of the radio buttons inside the group box that I created. I don't know if this is the prefix because I don't use those, but I just made it up. GRP is probably right. So I have this group box right here that contains radio buttons. The way radio buttons work, this is probably a future lesson, but only one in a group can be selected. I could have just put them directly on the form if that's all the radio buttons I have in the whole form. Then the form itself is a group and only one in the form can be selected. But I went ahead and made it a little bit more formal by creating a group box. So since I created a group box, I named it group sides. And in my code, I'm going to iterate over all the controls in that group box. And that group box only has radio buttons, but I still need to do the hold down casting. So let's just give me a little bit more exposure to that. You don't have to know this yet. Just know what it's doing. It's going to look at all the controls, and if they're radio buttons, it's going to make it a radio button variable, and then it's going to check to see if it's checked. And if it is checked, it's going to take the text property of it, which is the thing you can see, and convert it to an integer, which is the number of sides. Then it returns the number of sides. So this will get either the 6, 10, or 12. And then what I can always do if I'm confused about optional arguments or optional parameters is I can call the parameter by name. If you look at the parameter in Play Craps, the name of that parameter, which is not optional, is sides. I can always say that this argument that I'm putting here, this S, is meant to go with the parameter in the method I'm calling named sides. So it's a way to make sure if you forget the order that the optional parameters are called in and all that, you can mix and match. If you always specify the name, it'll pair it up with the right one regardless of the order you put them in. That's the whole point of this. So this is just making it explicit. I'll do it here too. I left it out here, but you could also specify it. Okay, so when I run this in debug mode, you'll see how it works. So I'll do the case where you actually have a value in here. I'll put something like 12 and roll. well, I'll do it. Let's see what happens. Actually, I haven't run it with 10 yet. So it takes you to the first breakpoint. Let's step through it with F11. So it's going to go through and it doesn't necessarily go in the order you think. You think the 6 should be first because 6 was, oh, actually I changed it to something else, didn't I? Changed it to 10. The order is not always dependable, so don't count on the order. But at this time, the second radio button it looked at was the one that was checked. So it's going to get the value from that, which is 10. It's going to keep going through, even though it found one that was checked. You could have put a break in here in the if, so it didn't have to do this unnecessary final check through. But then it returns the sides, which is 10. And that 10 should go into the S. You see it's 0 right now, but after I step up with F11, and now it's 10. And then it checks to see if an integer was put into the number of games, right? Still doing that part too. And I think I did put one in, so it goes into this call, and it calls sides with S and number of games. And it's going to do a few iterations here to play, I forget how many I said, to play 10 or something. We don't want to go through all that. So just to show you what this actually means, I just realized I could do this as I was running it to make this more clear, what the point of this whole named parameters thing is. And it's this, if I can figure out where I am in the code. You might notice a small edit. So if you remember where the code was before, this is what we had. We had number. Wait, sides are first. So we had sides, and then an S, and then we had number of games. Because that's the order, right? The sides are first and then the number of games. But if you forgot the order, what you could do is name everything. So I know there's a number of games. Yeah, I know there's a number of games parameter. So I'm going to specify that, and I'm going to send it number of games from down here. Keep in mind these are two different number of games. They have the same name, but it's two variables. One variable is in this function, this method. See, I said I would say function sometimes. And one's up there. I named them differently for the sides though. So sides, the sides parameter gets what I call S right here. So you notice now they're out of order. Frankly, I don't like this a whole lot, but sometimes you might find it necessary. But sides is first, right? And then number of games in the parameter list for this method. But if you use the named parameters way of calling with the arguments, you can switch that if you want, or rearrange however you want, as long as you name everything in the right way. So even though this is the second parameter, I call it first by naming it, and likewise with this is the first parameter, but I call it second by naming it. So we just run it and make sure it works correctly. Again, for this one I need to specify a value here. Let's just do 1. Let's step through it. You'll see I'll do the radio buttons again. Eventually it'll catch one that's checked. It'll return that value. And so I think it was the default of 6, wasn't it? Yeah. Then because I did put something in the number of games text box, it calls this because the isInt is true. And we'll see if it put the things in the right places. So at this point, what would we got here? Number of sides. Sides is 6. Okay, that's correct. And then the number of games is in here somewhere in the loop. It should be 1 because I said let's just roll it one time. So there's the 1. So you get how it works. That's it for this one, and we'll see what else we need to cover in chapter 6.